On October 28, 1979, a senior Kenyan politician died just days before a general election. No public inquest, no released postmortem, no official explanation. But what makes the death even more controversial is who he was. Peter Muigai Kenyatta, the firstborn son of Kenya's founding president Jomo Kenyatta and the elder half-brother of former President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. For more than 4 decades, his death has remained surrounded by silence, speculation, and unanswered questions. And just months after his death, another tragedy struck his family. His 5th wife was murdered at the gate of their own home, and the case was never solved. But Peter Muigai Kenyatta's story does not begin with death. It begins at the very center of Kenya's political foundation and a legacy that history never fully explained. Peter Muigai Kenyatta was born on 20th November 1920, shortly after his parents' wedding. In 1919, Jomo Kenyatta, then known as Johnston Kamau, married his first wife, Grace Wahu, initially through a traditional Kikuyu ceremony. Because Kenyatta had been raised by his uncle Ngengi following the early death of his parents, family and customary obligations remained firmly rooted in Kikuyu tradition. However, when Wahu became pregnant with their first child, Peter Muigai, church elders from the Christian mission intervened. They insisted that the couple formalize their union under Christian and civil law to avoid excommunication.
There are so many incidents which took place during that time because he was the first African to have a motorbike. And because some of the Europeans who are in Kenya were not very happy about it, there were a time that there were collisions with those Europeans who see him in a motorbike. And because he doesn't want to be let down by them, well, he has to defend himself.
Complying with the church's demands, Kenyatta eventually formalized the marriage 3 years later before a European magistrate in a civil ceremony in November 1922.
We lived in Nairobi. As a young bride, I had to be given pleasure. Those were really good times. He had no dependents other than myself and our son Peter.
I know that my father hated discrimination, and again he was very active in doing things properly to show that even an African, although he's black or what, he can do exactly as what a European can do.
As Kenyatta's first child, Peter Muigai was 13 years older than his father's 4th wife. Some historians opine that, had circumstances been different, he might have inherited his father's political legacy. Instead, death came calling just 14 months after he had buried his own father. Muigai was an astute businessman who followed his father's footsteps. He was elected Member of Parliament for Juja in the 1974 general election, the second general election held after Kenya attained independence.
The country is a parliamentary democracy with nationwide elections.
At the time, anyone seeking elective office was required to be a life member of Mzee Kenyatta's KANU party. Kenya was then a one-party state after Kenyatta banned the Kenya's People's Union following the assassination of Tom Mboya ahead of the 1970 general election. The 1974 general election was particularly significant because it marked the first time Kenyans voted by secret ballot. Previously, a presiding officer observed the voting process and could identify the candidate of whom each voter had cast a ballot. The voting age was also reduced from 21 to 18 years. Muigai's Juja Constituency neighbored his father's larger Gatondo constituency, meaning that both father and son served together in Kenya's second parliament, a record that remains unbroken more than 5 decades later. Muigai's election was no easy victory. In fact, his closest rival, Gitowaka Hegeri, whom Muigai had unseated, disputed the election results. Jomo Kenyatta would later strengthen his family's grip on the country's political landscape by rewarding his own son the influential position of Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, deputizing Frederick Lawrence Monywa Wayaki. Gitowaka Hegeri would later reclaim the Juja parliamentary seat after being elected unopposed with 10,262 votes following Peter Muigai's death just days before the 1979 general election. Muigai died on 28 October 1979, only 10 days before the election. He was 58 years old. His death was immediately shrouded in mystery, and his funeral was reportedly restricted to close members of his family. To this day, the cause of his death has never been made public. Although the cause of his death has remained unknown for decades, it is widely believed that he was lifted high in the air during a campaign event and then dropped by a group of political miscreants. Given his large physique, it is believed he could not have survived such an ordeal if it indeed occurred. Some accounts suggest that this was not an ordinary accident, but a carefully planned and premeditated act connected to the anticipated division of Jomo Kenyatta's vast estate and the political succession that would later follow his death. On 26 September 1983, George Mohoho, brother to Kenya's First Lady Mama Ngina Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta's fourth wife, inherited Peter Muigai's Kenyatta political seat after he was elected the Member of Parliament for Juja during that year's general election. This was the first election held under President Daniel Arap Moi, who had succeeded Jomo Kenyatta. Candidates were required to pay 1,000 Kenya shillings to help cover part of the election expenses. President Moi had dissolved parliament a year before the normal end of its time, because the constitution at the time allowed the president to dissolve parliament at any time. This was reportedly done in order to clean the country's political system of disloyal elements who had served under the founding president Jomo Kenyatta. In a perfect case of like father like son, the former Juja MP was also a polygamist with 5 wives. Less than a year after Peter Muigai's death, tragedy struck the family again. On the night of 16 October 1980, his 5th and youngest widow, Esther Joki, was found murdered at the gate of the family farm. The killers have never been brought to justice. The 2 deaths, occurring within such a short period, raised many questions about what had transpired. Although some accounts suggest that members of the wider Kenyatta family knew what had happened, the circumstances surrounding both deaths have remained a closely guarded secret for decades. This, despite Peter Muigai being Jomo Kenyatta's firstborn son and Kenya's Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs. Mrs. Muigai, then aged 47 years, was attacked and murdered by unknown assailants as she drove home. Interestingly, she was killed only a few meters from the Gatharaine Armoury, a military installation guarded around the clock by armed soldiers. Yet the attackers reportedly escaped without anyone noticing. How did this happen? At the time, the family's farm was located behind the armoury. A public road passed by the armoury gate to the farm, making it difficult to understand how the assailants managed to pass the heavily guarded installation, lie in wait, commit the murder, and escape unnoticed. Some members of the family later alleged that Esther Njoki had been targeted after questioning the mysterious demise of her husband and the subsequent distribution of his vast estate to his stepmother. When the gruesome murder occurred, her firstborn child Lois was 25 years old, while her lastborn child Susan was 15 years old. Her 4 children, Lois, Jennifer, Eugene and Susan, were among the 22 children left behind by Peter Muigai following his death. This would mean that Peter Muigai Kenyatta's youngest child is now about 62 years old, placing them in the same age bracket as their uncle, Kenya's 4th President Uhuru Kenyatta. At the time of his death, Peter Muigai Kenyatta was survived by his 5 wives. His first wife had 5 children. The second and the third wives had 5 children each. The fourth wife had 3 children, while the fifth wife had 4 children. One of his wives, Charity Gathoni Muigai, died on 28 November 2017. 2 other known wives were Mary Wahu and Rachel Ajiru. One of his sons, James Mberi, died in 1998 while receiving treatment at a hospital in South Africa following an aircraft crash in Nairobi. Mberi was the firstborn son of Mary Wahu. Muigai was Jomo Kenyatta's heir apparent, and some historians opine that he was a most likely successor to his father. However, it appears that Jomo Kenyatta never fully prepared him to inherit the leadership mantle, as he became increasingly focused on the affairs of his 4th and younger family. Historical photographs frequently show Jomo Kenyatta alongside Mama Ngina Kenyatta and the young Uhuru, while his first wife Grace Wahu never assumed the role of Kenya's First Lady after independence. By the time Jomo Kenyatta left for Britain on the instructions of the Kikuyu Central Association, his firstborn son, Peter Muigai, was already 9 years old.
You could hear my father's name being mentioned in songs and dances which were danced by then, criticizing the missionary. One called Muthiregu, of which they used to say that Jomo or Johnston Kamau, he'll have a cup of tea with other natives. That's a kanywa chai native. That's to mean that he'll have the tea together with other natives, although he's in Britain. So his reputation was kept by those who knew what he was doing.
Uhuru Kenyatta eventually followed in his father's political footsteps. Some observers have speculated that, had Peter Muigai Kenyatta survived, Kenya might have had Muigai Sr. as its 2nd president, with Muigai Jr. perhaps later becoming the 3rd or even the 4th president of the Republic of Kenya. Even though the histories of his parents and his sister, Margaret Wambui Kenyatta, are well documented and preserved on Wikipedia, Peter Muigai's own story appears to be conspicuously missing from the world's largest online encyclopedia. Is this omission merely by default, or is it by design? Who could have kept the story of Jomo Kenyatta's firstborn son under wraps, allowing generations to grow up without knowing who he was? At the National Library of Australia, among its catalogues, lies a publication titled Kenya, compiled by Peter Muigai Kenyatta in 1969. Muigai featured prominently during his father's state funeral in 1978, accompanying the ceremonial gun carriage that transported Jomo Kenyatta's body to its final resting place at Parliament grounds. It is said that the same gun carriage had carried the body of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill 13 years earlier. His mother, Grace Wahu, also featured prominently during the funeral procession, traveling behind the gun carriage that bore the remains of the man she had once loved. Little did Muigai know that fate would place him next in line for burial, barely a year after laying his father to rest. Let us now unwrap and reveal the long-hidden and controversial story of Peter Muigai Kenyatta. Had he lived to inherit his father's political mantle, would he have ruled Kenya more harshly than Daniel Arap Moi?